It was just a small act of kindness, or so she thought. When a shy cafe waitress offers to pay for a stranger's coffee, she doesn't expect anything in return. But just a few hours later, her entire world is turned upside down when she discovers who he really is, and what he's about to do will change her life forever. Stay tuned, because this story proves that the smallest gestures can lead to the biggest surprises. Emma Rodriguez had worked at Been There Done That, a small independent coffee shop in Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood, for 3 years. At 26, she had settled into a quiet routine that suited her introverted nature perfectly. Early morning shifts that ended before the afternoon rush, regular customers who knew her by name, and just enough income to afford her studio apartment 2 blocks away. Emma wasn't ambitious in the conventional sense. She didn't dream of corporate success or social media fame. Her aspirations were simpler, perhaps someday opening her own small bookshop cafe hybrid, maybe adopting a rescue dog, definitely finding someone who appreciated her quiet nature rather than constantly pushing her to be more outgoing. She had grown up in foster care after her parents died in a house fire when she was 8. The system had shuffled her between homes until she aged out at 18, leaving her with a deep-seated wariness of people's motives and an intense need for stability. Being There Done That represented the first place she had ever felt truly secure. The cafe's owner, Mrs. Chun, treated Emma like the daughter she'd never had. The other employees, mostly college students and aspiring artists, respected Emma's preference for working quietly in the background. Regular customers often left extra tips specifically for her, appreciating her gentle manner and perfect memory for their usual orders. Emma's life wasn't exciting, but it was hers. She read voraciously during slow periods, volunteered at the animal shelter on weekends, and had been slowly saving money for community college classes in literature and business. She lived carefully, never taking risks, never drawing attention to herself. That cautious existence served her well until the morning she encountered David Harrison, though she wouldn't learn his real name for several more hours. The day started like any other Tuesday in October. Emma arrived at Been There Done That at 5:30 a.m. to prepare for the morning rush. Mrs. Chin was visiting family in Vancouver, leaving Emma and Jake, a 22-year-old art student, to handle the morning shift alone. By 7:45 a.m., the initial wave of commuters had cleared out, leaving only a few lingering customers with laptops and newspapers. Emma was wiping down tables when she noticed a man in his early 40s sitting alone in the corner booth, staring intently at his phone with an expression of barely controlled frustration. He looked expensive, not flashy, but everything about him spoke of quiet wealth. His casual clothes were perfectly fitted, his watch was understated but clearly high-end, and even his sneakers looked like they cost more than Emma made in a week. Yet something about his posture suggested vulnerability, a crack in what was otherwise a carefully composed exterior. Emma approached the man's table to refill his coffee cup, as she had done twice already that morning. This time, however, she noticed his hands were shaking slightly as he held his phone. "Excuse me," she said quietly. "Is everything all right?" The man looked up, startled. For a moment, Emma saw something raw and desperate in his eyes before he quickly composed himself. "Oh yes, thank you. Just some work troubles," he said, offering a strained smile. "Nothing that another coffee won't help with." Emma nodded and reached for his cup, but the man's phone buzzed with an incoming call. She watched his face change as he read the caller ID, watched hope drain away and resignation take its place. "I'm sorry," he said, not answering the phone. "I know this sounds pathetic, but would it be possible could I sit here a little longer without ordering anything else? I'm supposed to meet someone soon, and I'd rather not do it on the street." There was something in his voice, a quality Emma recognized from her own past. The sound of someone who had nowhere safe to go. "Of course," she said immediately. "Take all the time you need." The man's smile became more genuine. "Thank you. I'm David, by the way." "Emma," she replied, surprised by her own willingness to share even that small detail with a stranger. Over the next hour, Emma found herself stealing glances at David's corner booth. He made several phone calls, each one seeming to leave him more deflated. At one point, she overheard fragments of what sounded like a business negotiation gone wrong, mentions of contracts, deadlines, and letting everyone down. Around 9:30, David approached the counter where Emma was organizing receipt slips. His expensive clothes looked rumpled now, and there were dark circles under his eyes that she hadn't noticed before. "I hate to ask this," he said, clearly embarrassed, "but I seem to have left my wallet in my other jacket. Could I possibly pay you back for the coffee tomorrow? I know how this sounds, but—" Emma didn't let him finish. Without thinking, she opened the register and pulled out a $10 bill from her tip jar, money she had been saving for textbooks. "Please," she said, sliding the money across the counter. "Don't worry about paying it back." David stared at the bill as if it were something precious. "I can't accept this. You don't even know me." "That's exactly why I can offer it," Emma said, blushing slightly at her own boldness. Sometimes strangers are the only ones who can help without expecting anything in return. David picked up the money slowly, his eyes never leaving Emma's face. "What's your last name, Emma?" "Rodriguez," she answered without thinking. "Emma Rodriguez," he repeated quietly, as if memorizing it. "I won't forget this kindness." Something in the way he said it made Emma's skin prickle with unease, but before she could analyze the feeling, David had thanked her again and left the cafe. Emma spent the rest of her shift trying to forget the interaction, telling herself she was overthinking a simple act of generosity. She had helped a stranger in need, nothing more complicated than that. She had no way of knowing that David had spent the previous hour deliberately manipulating the situation, that his forgotten wallet was actually locked in his BMW parked outside, or that her full name and place of employment were now being entered into a database that tracked potential assets for a corporate acquisition strategy known internally as human capital integration. Most disturbing of all, she couldn't have known that the morning's encounter had been carefully orchestrated after weeks of surveillance and psychological profiling designed to identify her specific vulnerabilities and triggers. Emma's shift ended at 2 p.m., and she decided to treat herself to lunch at a small Vietnamese restaurant 3 blocks away. She rarely ate out, but the morning's good deed had left her feeling unusually optimistic about the world. She was halfway through her pho when Jake burst through the restaurant door, looking panicked. "Emma! Thank God I found you!" he gasped, sliding into the booth across from her. "You need to see this. Right now." Jake thrust his phone toward her, showing a local news website. The headline read, "Harrison Industries CEO announces surprise acquisition of local coffee chain." Emma scanned the article, confused about why Jake seemed so agitated. Harrison Industries, a major Northwest corporation, had apparently purchased the small regional chain that included several independent coffee shops around Seattle. The acquisition was being framed as part of the company's commitment to supporting local businesses while expanding their hospitality portfolio. "I don't understand," Emma said. "What does this have to do with—" "Keep reading," Jake interrupted urgently. "Look at the photo." Emma scrolled down to find a professional headshot accompanying the article. The man in the expensive suit, photographed in what was clearly a corporate boardroom, was undeniably the same person who had claimed to have forgotten his wallet that morning. David Harrison, CEO and majority owner of Harrison Industries. Net worth estimated at over $200 million. Emma felt the room tilt slightly around her. "This can't be right," she whispered. Jake leaned forward intently. "It gets worse, Emma. Look at the list of properties they're acquiring." Emma's hands began to shake as she read through the acquisition details. Being there done that was mentioned specifically, along with 12 other independent coffee shops throughout the Seattle area. The purchase had apparently been finalized that morning, just hours after David Harrison had sat in their cafe claiming financial distress. He was lying, Emma said, more to herself than to Jake. About everything. "Emma," Jake said gently, "there's something else. After you left, Mrs. Chun called from Vancouver. Harrison Industries contacted her 3 days ago with an offer to buy Bean There Done That. She turned them down initially, said she wanted to discuss it with her employees first, especially you." Emma felt sick. 3 days ago. So when he came in this morning, he already knew he was going to own the place, Jake confirmed. "The paperwork was probably being filed while he was sitting there letting you buy his coffee." Emma stared at David Harrison's corporate headshot, trying to reconcile the vulnerable man from that morning with this polished executive. The expensive clothes suddenly made sense, as did his perfect composure despite his claimed financial troubles. "But why?" she asked. Why pretend to need help? He could have just bought his coffee and left. Jake's expression grew more serious. That's what I'm worried about, Emma. Rich guys don't usually play elaborate games like this unless they want something specific. As if summoned by their conversation, Emma's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Emma, this is David from the cafe this morning. I'd like to repay your kindness and discuss a business opportunity that might interest you. Are you free for dinner tonight? I promise I can explain everything. Emma showed the message to Jake, who immediately shook his head. Don't respond. This is getting really weird really fast. But Emma was already typing. How did you get my phone number? The response came within seconds. I have some connections in the industry. I hope you don't mind. I was impressed by your character and wanted to follow up on our conversation. Emma, please, Jake said urgently. This guy just bought your workplace under false pretenses and somehow got your personal information within hours of meeting you. Those aren't connections in the industry. That's corporate espionage. Emma stared at her phone, remembering the way David had asked for her full name that morning. At the time, it had seemed like polite interest. Now it felt calculated, predatory. Another text arrived. I know this must seem strange, but I'd really like to make up for the misunderstanding this morning. There's a position opening in my company that I think would be perfect for someone with your customer service skills and integrity. Jake grabbed Emma's wrist gently. Emma, listen to me. Billionaire CEOs don't personally recruit coffee shop waitresses they met once unless something seriously fucked up is going on. Despite Jake's warnings, Emma found herself curious about David Harrison's true motives. That evening, instead of responding to his text messages, she spent hours researching Harrison Industries online. What she found was troubling. Harrison Industries had built its empire through aggressive acquisition strategies, but unlike typical corporate raiders, they specialized in what business journals called human-centered integration. Instead of simply buying companies and stripping assets, they identified key employees who embodied the target company's culture and values, then recruited those individuals to help facilitate smoother transitions. On the surface, it seemed progressive, a more humane approach to corporate expansion. But as Emma dug deeper into business forums and former employee reviews, a darker picture emerged. Harrison Industries didn't just recruit key employees. They studied them extensively first, building detailed psychological profiles to determine exactly how to approach each potential asset. The company maintained what former insiders called behavioral databases, containing personal information about thousands of individuals across the Pacific Northwest. One particularly disturbing review, posted anonymously on a business forum, described the process in detail. They don't just hire you, they psychologically map you first. They know your fears, your financial pressures, your family situation, your dreams. By the time they make their offer, they've already figured out exactly what combination of opportunity and pressure will make you say yes. Emma's blood ran cold as she read testimonial after testimonial from former Harrison Industries employees describing similar experiences. Initial contact that seemed coincidental. Job offers that appeared too good to be true. Signing bonuses that came with restrictive non-compete clauses. And always, the sense that their new employer knew intimate details about their lives that hadn't been shared during any interview process. Several reviewers mentioned being approached after performing small acts of kindness that were somehow observed and documented by Harrison Industries representatives. One woman described being recruited after helping an elderly man who had fallen outside her workplace, only to later discover the man was a private investigator hired to assess her character. Emma realized with growing horror that her encounter with David Harrison had likely been orchestrated from beginning to end. His presence at Bean, their done that wasn't coincidental. He had been studying her, waiting for the right moment to trigger her protective instincts and generous nature. Her phone buzzed with another message from David. Emma, I understand you might be feeling confused about this morning's events. I'd really like to explain everything in person. I think you'll find my offer very interesting and very generous. This time, Emma decided to respond. I know who you are, Mr. Harrison. I know you already own the cafe when you pretended to need help with your coffee. The response came immediately. Then you know I didn't need to pretend anything. The fact that I chose to approach you the way I did should tell you something about how seriously I take this opportunity. Emma stared at the message, unsettled by its implications. David Harrison was admitting to the deception while somehow framing it as a compliment. Another message followed. "You're researching my company right now, aren't you? Good. That shows the kind of thorough thinking I value. But you're only finding part of the story online. The real offer is much more substantial than anything you'll read in business journals." Emma's skin crawled at the realization that David somehow knew she was currently investigating his company. Was her internet activity being monitored? Had he placed some kind of tracking software on her phone during their brief interaction? She decided to test his knowledge. "What exactly are you offering?" "A position as Regional Community Relations Manager for our Pacific Northwest Hospitality Division. Starting salary of $85,000, full benefits, stock options, and a $20,000 signing bonus. Your job would be to help us integrate recently acquired properties like Being There Done that in ways that preserve their community character." Emma nearly dropped her phone. The salary alone was more than triple what she made at the cafe. The signing bonus represented more money than she had ever seen at one time. But the timing felt manipulative. David Harrison had created a problem, buying her workplace without warning, and was now presenting himself as the solution, offering her financial security in exchange for helping him implement the very changes that threatened her stable life. "Why me?" she typed. "Because this morning you demonstrated exactly the kind of authentic community connection our integration strategy depends on. You acted from genuine kindness rather than calculation. That's increasingly rare in business, and it's exactly what we need to succeed in the long term." Emma realized she was being offered a job that essentially required her to become complicit in the corporate acquisition of her own community. Harrison Industries wanted to use her authentic relationships and local credibility to ease their expansion into spaces where they weren't welcome. Over the following days, David Harrison's recruitment campaign intensified in ways that made Emma increasingly uncomfortable. First came the flowers, an expensive arrangement delivered to Being There Done that with a note reading, "Thank you again for your kindness. The offer stands whenever you're ready to discuss it." Then Mrs. Chun called from Vancouver with disturbing news. Harrison Industries had contacted her again, this time with a significantly higher offer for Being There Done that. They had also provided detailed information about her family's financial situation, including her grandson's college tuition costs, and her own mounting medical bills from a recent surgery. "Emma," Mrs. Chun said during their phone conversation, "I don't know how they knew about Tommy's tuition or my doctor bills. I never discussed those things with anyone from their company." Emma felt sick. Harrison Industries wasn't just pressuring her, they were systematically gathering information about everyone in her social circle, looking for leverage points that could be used to influence their decisions. The next day brought a visit from 2 Harrison Industries representatives who came to Being There Done that during Emma's shift. They didn't speak to her directly but spent 20 minutes photographing the cafe's interior, measuring spaces, and discussing optimization opportunities loud enough for her to overhear. One of them, a woman in an expensive suit, made a point of complimenting Emma's customer service skills to Jake while Emma was within earshot. "We've heard wonderful things about your colleague. She seems like exactly the kind of community-focused employee we'd love to work with during our transition period." That evening, Emma discovered that David Harrison had somehow obtained her personal email address and sent her a detailed job description for the Regional Community Relations Manager position. The document was surprisingly specific about her responsibilities, including managing the cultural integration of recently acquired properties and serving as a liaison between corporate headquarters and local communities. Most disturbingly, the job description seemed tailored specifically to Emma's background and interests. It mentioned opportunities to develop literary programming for cafe spaces and to work with local animal rescue organizations on community partnership initiatives, details that suggested extensive research into her personal life and hobbies. Emma had never mentioned her volunteer work at the animal shelter to David Harrison during their brief interaction. She had never discussed her interest in literature or her dream of combining books and coffee in a business setting. Yet somehow, Harrison Industries knew these intimate details about her aspirations. She began to notice other signs of surveillance. Jake mentioned that a man in a parked car had been watching the cafe for several days, taking notes when Emma arrived and left work. Her downstairs neighbor asked if she knew why someone had been asking questions about her schedule and living situation. Most unnervingly, Emma started receiving targeted advertisements on social media for luxury apartments, graduate school programs, and high-end retailers, all accompanied by taglines like, "Ready for the next chapter," and "You deserve better." The psychological pressure was carefully calibrated. Harrison Industries wasn't making threats or creating obvious problems. Instead, they were systematically demonstrating their power while positioning themselves as the solution to challenges Emma hadn't even realized she faced. David Harrison sent daily text messages that were friendly but persistent. "Just wanted to check in and see if you've had time to consider our conversation. The position is still available whenever you're ready to discuss details. I hope you know how much I respect your thoughtful approach to important decisions." Emma realized she was being subjected to a sophisticated form of corporate stalking disguised as professional recruitment. Harrison Industries was using their resources to map her entire life, then leveraging that information to create a sense of inevitability around their job offer. Emma's breaking point came when she discovered that David Harrison had been manipulating her situation far more extensively than she had realized. It started when her landlord called to inform her that the building had been sold to a property management company that specialized in luxury renovations. Her rent would be doubling within 60 days unless she agreed to relocate to a company-owned apartment complex across town. Emma's stomach dropped as she researched the property management company. It was a subsidiary of Harrison Industries. David Harrison had engineered her housing crisis to coincide with his job offer. He wasn't just recruiting her, he was systematically eliminating her alternatives to create a situation where accepting his offer seemed like her only option. When Emma called the property management office to inquire about her lease renewal options, the representative seemed unusually well informed about her situation. "Ms. Rodriguez, I see here that you're currently employed at Been There Done That. Have you considered that your employment situation might be changing soon as well? It might make sense to coordinate your housing decisions with your career transition." Emma hung up in horror. Harrison Industries wasn't just buying her workplace and her apartment building, they were coordinating these acquisitions to maximize pressure on her specifically. That evening, she decided to meet with David Harrison directly. Not to accept his offer, but to confront him about the systematic manipulation he was orchestrating. She texted him, "I'll meet you for coffee tomorrow, but not at a place you own." His response was immediate. "Of course. How about Pike Place Market at 3 p.m.? There's a small cafe on the mezzanine level that should give us privacy to talk." The next afternoon, Emma arrived at the specified location to find David Harrison waiting at a corner table. He looked exactly as polished and expensive as he had in his corporate headshot, but something in his demeanor suggested he was prepared for a confrontation. "Emma," he said, standing as she approached, "thank you for agreeing to meet. I know this situation has been confusing." Emma didn't sit down. "Confusing isn't the word I'd use," she said quietly. "Manipulative, predatory, those seem more accurate." David's expression didn't change. "I understand why you might see it that way. Corporate recruitment can seem overwhelming when you're not used to it." "Corporate recruitment?" Emma's voice rose slightly. "You bought my workplace, my apartment building, and somehow obtained detailed information about my personal life, all to pressure me into taking a job I never applied for. That's not recruitment. That's coercion." David gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Please sit down. I think there are some things you don't understand about how business works at this level." Emma remained standing. "Explain it to me." David leaned back in his chair, his demeanor shifting from friendly to businesslike. "Emma, we live in a competitive economy. Successful companies identify valuable assets and acquire them before competitors do. That includes human assets, people with the skills and character traits we need." "I'm not an asset," Emma said firmly. "I'm a person." "Of course you are," David replied smoothly. "But you're also someone with a specific combination of skills, experience, and community credibility that would be extremely valuable to our expansion strategy. We're offering you an opportunity to be compensated fairly for that value." Emma felt a chill at the calculated way he spoke about her, as if she were a piece of equipment being appraised for purchase. "And if I refuse?" she asked. David's smile became less warm. "Well, that would be unfortunate for everyone involved. Mrs. Chin is facing some significant financial pressures with her medical bills and her grandson's education costs. The sale of Been There Done That would resolve those issues for her. Your new landlord is eager to begin renovations that will improve the neighborhood's property values. These changes are happening regardless of your employment decisions. Emma realized she was listening to a carefully veiled threat. David Harrison was making it clear that the disruptions to her life would continue whether she cooperated or not, but that cooperation would make her transition more comfortable. So you're giving me a choice between helping you or watching you destroy everything I care about anyway? Emma asked. David's expression grew more serious. I'm offering you a choice between being part of a successful transition or being displaced by it. Emma, change is inevitable in a dynamic economy. The question is whether you want to benefit from that change or be left behind by it. Emma sat down across from David Harrison, not because she was ready to negotiate, but because she needed to understand the full scope of what she was facing. How long have you been planning this? She asked. David checked his expensive watch, a gesture Emma now recognized as calculated to remind her of the resources at his disposal. We began researching Been There Done That and similar properties about 8 months ago, he said. Your name came up repeatedly in our community impact assessments. Customers specifically mentioned your role in creating the cafe's welcoming atmosphere. Emma felt nauseated. You've been studying me for 8 months. We've been studying the entire ecosystem, David corrected. Successful acquisition strategies require understanding all the human factors that contribute to a business's community value. You emerged as a key component. He pulled out a tablet and showed Emma a document that made her blood run cold. It was a detailed psychological profile with her name at the top, complete with photographs taken without her knowledge over several months. The profile included sections labeled financial vulnerabilities, emotional triggers, social connections, and recruitment strategy. Emma saw notes about her volunteer work, her reading habits, her transportation patterns, even her grocery shopping preferences. This is stalking, Emma whispered. This is due diligence, David replied calmly. We needed to understand what motivates you, what concerns you, and what kind of offer would be most appealing. The morning at the cafe was simply the implementation phase of our recruitment plan. Emma scanned the document, horrified by its thoroughness. Harrison Industries knew about her childhood in foster care, her financial struggles, her social anxiety, and her deep attachment to routine and stability. They had weaponized her personal history to design an approach guaranteed to trigger her protective instincts. The forgotten wallet, Emma said, understanding flooding over her. You knew I would offer to help. David nodded approvingly. Our behavioral analysis indicated a 73% probability that you would offer financial assistance to someone in apparent distress, particularly if they approached you during a period of low customer traffic when you felt secure in your environment. Emma felt sick. And if I hadn't offered to pay for your coffee? We had alternative scenarios prepared, David said matter-of-factly. A spilled drink that you would help clean up, a conversation about the artwork on the walls that would allow us to demonstrate shared interests, a medical emergency that would trigger your caretaking instincts. We had contingencies for every likely response pattern. Emma stared at the man across from her, realizing she was looking at someone who viewed human compassion as nothing more than a system to be gamed. The job offer, she said slowly. It's not real, is it? You're not actually planning to let me manage community relations. David's smile returned. The position is quite real, Emma. And you would be excellent at it, precisely because your responses are so predictable. We need someone who will genuinely care about maintaining positive community relationships during our transition period. But once the transition is complete, once the integration is successful, your role would naturally evolve. Corporate restructuring is an ongoing process. Emma understood. She was being offered a temporary position designed to use her community credibility to facilitate Harrison Industries' expansion. Once that expansion was complete and her relationships had been leveraged to normalize the corporate presence, she would become expendable. And if I refuse everything? Emma asked. The job, the apartment, all of it? David's expression hardened slightly. Emma, let me be direct with you. We've invested considerable resources in acquiring the properties and relationships necessary to make this offer. That investment needs to generate returns. He leaned forward slightly. Mrs. Chen's medical bills are quite substantial. If she can't complete the sale of Been There Done That soon, she may face some difficult financial decisions. Your building renovation project will proceed regardless of your housing choices, though residents who relocate voluntarily receive significantly better terms than those who require formal eviction proceedings. Emma felt the trap closing around her. David Harrison was making it clear that everyone she cared about would face consequences if she didn't cooperate. "You're threatening to destroy other people's lives to force me to take a job," Emma said. "I'm explaining economic realities," David replied smoothly. "Markets change. Properties get developed. Businesses get acquired. These processes can be smooth and beneficial for everyone involved, or they can be disruptive and painful. Your decision will largely determine which outcome occurs." Emma sat in silence for several minutes, processing the full scope of David Harrison's manipulation. She was facing a choice between complicity and destruction, but it wasn't really a choice at all. Harrison Industries had engineered a situation where resistance would harm everyone she cared about while benefiting no one. "I need some time to think," Emma said finally. David nodded. "Of course. But Emma, I should mention that our timeline is quite firm. We need your decision by Friday. That's 3 days from now. After that point, we'll need to proceed with alternative integration strategies." Emma understood the subtext. She had 3 days to accept David's offer or watch him implement harsher methods to achieve the same corporate objectives. She stood to leave, but David's voice stopped her. "Emma, I want you to understand something. What we're offering you is real opportunity. The salary, the benefits, the chance to influence how these transitions happen, it's all genuine. You could build a career with us, develop your skills, gain experience that would serve you well throughout your professional life." Emma turned back to face him. "At what cost? My integrity, my community's trust, my ability to sleep at night, knowing I helped you manipulate other people the way you manipulated me." David's expression became almost paternal. "Emma, you're thinking about this in very black and white terms. Business is more nuanced than that. We're not destroying communities, we're evolving them. We're not manipulating people, we're identifying what they need and finding ways to provide it profitably. And if what they need conflicts with what's profitable," Emma asked. "Smart business finds ways to align those interests," David replied. "That's exactly the kind of problem-solving we'd want you to help us with." Emma realized that David Harrison genuinely believed his own rationalization. He had convinced himself that systematic manipulation was simply sophisticated business strategy, that economic coercion was market-driven evolution, and that exploitation was actually value creation. "I'll give you my answer on Friday," Emma said. As she walked away from the cafe, Emma felt the weight of an impossible decision. She could accept David Harrison's offer and become complicit in the corporate machinery that was systematically dismantling her community. Or she could refuse and watch that same machinery destroy the people and places she cared about anyway, just less efficiently and with more collateral damage. But as Emma walked through Pike Place Market, surrounded by the authentic community interactions that David Harrison wanted to modify and control, she began to understand that there might be a third option, one that David Harrison's psychological profile hadn't predicted because it required a kind of courage that his behavioral algorithms couldn't measure. Emma Rodriguez had spent her entire adult life avoiding risk, seeking stability, trying not to draw attention to herself. But sometimes the most dangerous choice is the one that seems safest. And sometimes the only way to protect the things you love is to risk losing everything in the process. David Harrison had made one critical error in his assessment of Emma's character. He had correctly identified her protective instincts, her financial vulnerabilities, and her desire for security. But he had failed to account for what happens when someone gentle discovers they've been systematically deceived by someone they trusted. Emma had 3 days to decide whether to surrender to David Harrison's manipulation or to find a way to fight back against an opponent who had unlimited resources and no apparent moral constraints. The shy cafe waitress who had bought a stranger's coffee was about to discover exactly how dangerous she could become when everything she valued was threatened by someone who mistook her kindness for weakness. Friday was coming, and David Harrison had badly underestimated what Emma Rodriguez was capable of when she finally stopped being afraid.